At the Natural History Museum, like I said, we study and share stories of the amazing nature in and around Los Angeles from the past, the present, and even the future. And each week in this webinar series, we've been learning how and why we study the nature in LA by hearing from a different museum staff member who takes us behind the scenes or out into the field and shows us real tools, real specimens that they use in their work at the museum. Last time we heard from Nefti Camacho about the amazing local reptiles and amphibians that live in Los Angeles and how he takes care of the museum's herpetology collections to help us learn about those reptiles and amphibians. This time we'll be looking at how the museum shares stories about the nature in Los Angeles, and we'll be doing that through one of our exhibitions called Becoming Los Angeles. An exhibition or an exhibit is a collection of objects and experiences, things like videos, that help to tell a story. For our warm-up activity today, we'll be looking closely at something from the Becoming Los Angeles exhibition. Now, this beautiful altar or ofrenda, which is the Spanish word for offering, is located in the Becoming Los Angeles exhibit, and it's a celebration of Los Angeles. Altars are used in many cultures, and they often serve as a center of worship or ritual. The artist who made this altar, Ofelia Esparza, used the traditions of altar making usually associated with the Mexican holiday, Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, when she made this altar. Ophelia was inspired by stories of how people's actions intersected with nature and changed a tiny frontier town to the LA we know today. Now, my challenge for you today is to see if you can spot objects or images on the altar that represent nature. I'll move through a few pictures that'll give us a closer look. You can feel free to share what you're seeing in the chat. You can keep a list in your notebook or even make sketches of what you're seeing. Okay, are you ready? We're going to go through these pictures kind of fast. Remember, you are trying to spot anywhere that nature is represented. All right, let's get into it. All right, our first image, where is nature represented or shown in this section of the altar? What do we see? I'm seeing people noticing flowers and plants, birds, even the sun. All right, birds at the bottom. Let's see, let's take a look at our next picture. I think we get even more zoomed in. All right, what more are we seeing? See some folks noticing branches that looked like kind of a river on that last picture. We've got some food items like a banana. That's definitely nature. Yeah, thank you so much. All right, let's take a look at our next picture. See what more nature we can find. What do we see? Where is nature represented on this section of the altar? Some folks are noticing plants. In this section, we also have some animals like a donkey or a cow. People are also part of nature. I love that. Yeah, awesome. So nature is all over. Let's look at another picture. What more can we find? Where do we see nature in this picture, this section of the altar? A lot of students are noticing plants, cats. We've got a butterfly in this section. Yeah, nature is really part of the story that's being told in this altar. All right, let's go to our next picture. Where is nature represented in this section of the altar? Is it different than the last section we saw? What do we notice? Humans are part of nature, absolutely. Folks are noticing butterflies, animals, plants. There's all kinds of nature that's part of the story of Los Angeles. More flowers, lots of flowers in this altar. All right, my friends, this is our last image. Let's take a look and see what nature we can see in this section. Now that we've seen some examples of the way Ofelia Esparza represented nature stories in this altar, I'm going to challenge all you to think about how nature is part of your story. If you were to add an object to this altar to represent the nature in your life, what might it be? If you have an idea, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. What would you add to this altar to represent the nature in your life? Nice. I'm seeing some answers come in. Butterflies, a sun, reptiles and mammals, a piece of granite from Cynthia. Christopher is mentioning that we're mammals, so mammals would be a good thing to represent nature for us. Rocks and bugs, flowers. I love all of these suggestions. Thank you so much for sharing today, everybody, and for looking closely at this altar, and for sharing pieces of kind of your nature story with what object you'd add. That was really fun. So today, the special guest we'll be meeting with is Danielle Sommer. Danielle is an exhibition developer at NHM. Hi, Danielle.
Hi.
We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Um, can you start by telling us a little bit about what you do at the museum? What exactly is an exhibition developer?
Sure. So, an exhibition developer is someone who makes exhibitions. And like Lindsay said at the beginning of the presentation, that's, an exhibition is basically it's a collection of objects and sometimes things like videos. They can be big or they can be. This is an example of a bigger exhibition that was at our museum called The Natural History of Horror. And we actually built a version of Dr. Frankenstein's lab in the exhibition. Or the exhibitions can be really tiny. So I have this, if you can see me, I have this little teeny tiny kitty cat here. You could take something small like this, put it on a shelf in your room, and invite people to come and learn about it. And that's an exhibition too. So I work on figuring out stories at the museum for the exhibitions we do and figuring out what objects we should put in the exhibition. And I spend a lot of time in my office, which you can kind of see behind me here. And I spend a lot of time writing and talking to people and researching objects. I've got another, like this fun seagull. And that's basically the gist of what I do.
That sounds like a really fun job. You get to kind of tell stories and think about how to share those stories with the public. Are there any like special tools that you use in your work?
Yeah, maybe not special, but I definitely have tools. And actually, they're all tools that you guys probably have access to too. I use a lot of notebooks to take notes and sketchbooks to draw. I use my phone. I use my phone a lot. There's my daughter on my phone. I take pictures of the things I'm looking at and I record when I'm talking to people so I don't forget what we talked about. I use, if I can find it, I use lots of different libraries all over the city. So I definitely use library cards. And then I use our collections because that's where most of our stories are. So we have a lot of different types of collections and a lot of different objects in our collections, and all of those objects have stories.
That's super cool. So that's a really, really interesting job. Can you tell us how you ended up doing this work at the museum?
Yeah, I did. I honestly, I went to school. It's that I studied English. I studied art. I learned how to research. I did a lot of writing. I worked as a journalist for a while. If any of you guys have parents who listen to NPR or talk radio, I was on the radio for a bit. And then I worked as a curator, which is another type of person who makes exhibitions. And you don't have to go to school for as long as I did to do this job, but you definitely need to know how to talk to people and to research and to write.
I bet there are a lot of students that like to do those things. So it sounds like your path was kind of a little bit meandering. You didn't necessarily kind of set out to be an exhibition developer, but it's worked really well for you.
Yeah, I definitely, I think everything that I did before I ended up here is something that I rely on when I do this job.
Very cool. So this series is all about kind of LA and nature in LA, and you actually worked on an exhibit about the history of LA called Becoming Los Angeles. Can you tell us a little bit about that exhibition or exhibit?
Yeah, so this is Becoming Los Angeles is the story of Los Angeles, and there are many stories. It's one of our largest exhibitions, and when we were putting it together, we needed to figure out kind of what the story was, what the different stories were that we should tell. And so we started off by talking to people. We talked to Bill here. These are some of the people that I learned the most from. He's our history curator, and he knows a lot about pobladores, who are the first settlers of the Pueblo of Los Angeles. And we also talked to Julia, who is a Tongva elder. And I think you guys all know that there were people here long before the Spanish ever arrived, and she helped us learn about her ancestors. And then we talked to people like Ophelia, who is the artist who created the altar that you guys saw at the beginning of the presentation. And she helped us by talking to a lot of people for us. She went out all over Los Angeles and said to people, if there was one thing that you would want to put on an ofrenda to tell the story of your city, what would you want it to be? So she was a great help, and I hope you guys all have a chance to come to the museum and see the ofrenda. We also looked at a lot of objects. That's the biggest part of an exhibition. Some of these things made it in, and some of these things didn't. Some of my favorites are this grizzly bear. If you've seen it, we have a lot of taxidermied animals. So this is a grizzly bear. We looked at this Acorn Greenery, which is made of, I don't know if you guys can see me, but it's made of flexible willow, and these can be woven together when they're younger. And this would be where some of the indigenous Angelinos would store their acorns for the season. And then we looked at this cattle brand Registry, which I think is really beautiful. People brought a lot of cows to the city, the Pueblo really, and in order to keep track of whose cow was whose, and there was actually a lot of cattle thieving. People would brand their cows, and so this is a book where everybody's marks were recorded, so you knew whose cow was who, and all of these things did make it into the exhibit, so you guys can come and visit and see them. But after talking to all those people and looking at all the objects, we realized that one of the biggest stories about the city is that the story of the city, the story of the people in the city, is also really tied to the story of nature in the city. So that's one of the biggest stories in the exhibition.
That's really cool. So you kind of started, maybe it sounds like not necessarily knowing exactly what the story you were going to tell was. And in talking to people and looking at kind of objects, it turns out that the story of LA is really, really linked to the story of nature. Can you tell us more about that? I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I have a few more examples. It's time for you guys to help me out here. Does anybody know what this is? You can put it in the chat if you know. I'll wait a little bit. It is a shell. Does anybody know what kind of shell it is? Yes, it's an abalone shell. So this is a type of shellfish, and there were thousands and thousands of them. And you could say that they're the reason why people were in Los Angeles long before it was called Los Angeles, because this was a place that people could find food, and it was a place where people could find water, and it was a place where people could find shelter. So just in the very, very, very beginnings of our story, you can look at nature. We're here because there were resources, essentially. Let's see, I've got another picture for you guys to take a guess. Does anybody know what this is? This is another way that people and nature are intertwined. This is kind of hard. I know, it's tricky. It looks like bark. It is poop. Yeah, it's cow poop. It's dried cow poop. Exactly. Yes, I know. Stacked up. This picture was actually taken in India, but and we don't have cow poop in the exhibition, though we do have a taxidermied cow. And the reason why I'm showing you guys is because cows are not native to Los Angeles. They weren't there at the beginning, but people brought them later, and they brought different types of grasses to feed them with than what actually grew. So they bought non-native grasses and stuff with them. And the cows ate those grasses, and the seeds came out in their poop. And as the cows spread all over the city, again, it wasn't really a city yet, but as the cows spread out eating, the seeds took root, and essentially, because of cows, the type of grass that you find in Los Angeles is really different today than it would have been, 300, 400, 500 years ago. Like the cows sort of changed what the vegetation looks like here. All right, the next thing I have, another story of how nature and people are linked in LA. So I have this little bottle full of a liquid. This one is probably, hopefully this will be easy for you. Do you guys have guesses about what might be in this? It's clear. No, it's water. It's water. Yes. So it is water from the Los Angeles Aqueduct. I don't know. Does anyone know what an aqueduct is? I'll start. No, it's a series of pipes and canals and channels that move water from one place to another. So probably one of the biggest ways that nature and people are linked in Los Angeles is through the story of water. And there used to not be very many people here, and they got their water from the river. But as more and more people got here, there wasn't enough. So in 1913, the city of Los Angeles decided, well, actually 1908, the city of Los Angeles decided to build an aqueduct and start importing their water from other places in the state. And it was finished in 1913. And that's actually, we get most of our water today from other places, not from the Los Angeles River. So this is an anniversary bottle, but we do have a bottle of water from the opening of the aqueduct that's 100 years old that's in our exhibit that you can come see. Okay, so last one. It's another thing to guess. This is also about water. Does anyone want to guess what's happening in this picture? Yes, flood, exactly. Yep. So the Los Angeles River used to, I know we all think of it now as this paved over channel, but it used to move all over Los Angeles. Basically Los Angeles is a floodplain, and so during the winters, the rains would come and the water would flood. It would flood what used to just be the landscape, and then as people started coming and building houses, it would flood the city, and it would happen regularly. So this is probably the last big flood, and that is why they paved it. Good job, Santiago. So this was 1938, and right after this, they paved it with concrete in order to keep it from flooding and to fix it. And I think, you guys, I think that the river is going to be one of the big stories of your lifetimes, because when they did that, they basically, all of the plants and the animals that depended on the river started to disappear. And so now, if you guys have had a chance to do any field trips to the river with your schools, we're trying to rehabilitate it and bring some of those plants and animals back. And I think that one of the biggest stories of nature in LA for the next few decades is going to be what happens with that river and what happens with water in this city. So those are some of my favorite stories, but I wanted to make sure to leave time for you guys to ask me questions about what I do and how I got here and the exhibition and all of that. So now it's your turn.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle. That picture of a city just flooded is so wild. So we do have a question from Kelsey, who is curious, do you like your job?
I love my job. I did so many things before I started to do this job, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that I loved talking to people, and I knew that I loved writing, and I knew that I loved objects and museums, and it's so much fun. I basically get to hang out with curators and exhibition developers, do really similar things, but exhibition developers aren't in charge of collections the way that curators are. So I get to hang out with curators and ask them questions about what's in their collection, and I love to learn. So this is a job for people who like to just continually learn, and then who like to share what they learn in fun ways. I guess I didn't mention I also get to do things like make videos and make interactives and that kind of stuff, and so that's part of the job as well. So it's also kind of creative. So it's a little bit like being in art school at the same time that you're in regular school. So it works for both parts of my brain because I'm both sides. I like to make things, and then I also like to do research and talk about things.
Sounds like it's the perfect job for you. You like people, you like to be creative, and you like to learn, and that's
Yep.
kind of important to exhibition development.
Yep.
Very cool. I bet some of our students would enjoy doing that work as well. So let's see, kind of thinking about your path to the museum, Mia and Caitlin are both curious about what college you went to.
Oh, well, I went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and that's where I studied English. That's where I did my undergraduate, if you guys know what that means. But I also did a master's program. So I went back and I did art history and studio art at the same time. So, and like I said, you don't have to do that much school to have this job, but I think you probably at least need to do your undergraduate.
Cool. So school's an important bit, but there's kind of probably multiple
Yep.
ways you can go.
Yep.
Okay, this might be a hard question. This is from Jesse. What is your favorite exhibition you've worked on and why?
Oh, that's actually really easy. So I don't know if any of you guys got to come to this exhibition, to this museum when we had our exhibition on tattooing. We did an exhibition that told the story of tattoo. And tattoos have been around for thousands of years. And we started at the beginning and we went all the way up till today. And we got to tell the story of how important Los Angeles is in the history of tattoo, because there was a style of tattooing that was invented here. And I got to work with a lot of tattoo artists, and I wasn't in my office at all. I actually was driving all around Southern California, meeting people at their tattoo studios and finding out just the history, different things that they felt were important. And we actually put a tattoo parlor in the museum, and we invited people to come and get tattooed in the museum. And it was so much fun to put together, both because of all the people we worked with. It was kind of a huge community collaboration. And it was also really meaningful to a lot of people because, they got to bring their grandma, like some of the guys and women that we worked with who are tattoo artists got to bring their family and say, look, I'm in a museum exhibition. And it was really neat to see that. And then I think we also got to just talk about how we got to, for lack of a better way of putting it, we got to get rid of some stereotypes. I think some people have some stereotypes about tattooing, but it's actually a really important part of a lot of cultures. There's a lot of rituals that involve tattoo. So I think we got to talk about that and change some people's minds about how important tattooing is. And I would like to say one of those people was my father. So I was really happy to change my father's mind about how he felt about tattoos. Yes, I do like tattoos. I did get a tattoo at the exhibit. I don't want to jump. I don't want to jump.
That was going to be my next question. A lot of students are curious whether
Yeah,
you took the opportunity to get a tattoo.
I got a little dinosaur. A lot of the yes. Yes, I did. It was all, and this all involved the health department. It was all up to code and everything. So yes, it was
Super
fun.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you have creativity, the things that a museum exhibit can be are kind of endless. Tattoo
No
really should.
kids can get tattooed. You can't get a tattoo unless you're over 18, guys.
Yep.
But you could bring my daughter, and she got painted fake tattoos, and that was fun for her. So
Very cool. Well, we have a lot of students who were kind of curious. You showed a lot of really awesome pictures and objects. Isabel and Bianca are curious kind of where those photos came from. Jacob and some other students are curious about kind of where our collections come from. So where do these objects come from?
that's so interesting. So we have in our history collection, um, the Seaver Center. We have a lot of old photographs. So, and you can actually go to our website and search for photographs in our digital collections. So that's one place that you can find the photographs. And a lot of other libraries have digital photo collections too of historic images from LA's past. The LA Public Library does, the University of Southern California does, UCLA does. There's a lot of those. And in up in our collection, there are so many different ways. I think you guys know that our museum is over 100 years old. So we have had curators collect objects, like curators of herpetology and curators of ornithology. I think you guys met Kimball a couple weeks ago. They might, actually, I don't think that they're currently collecting, but there were periods of time where people were collecting animals, and there are we just did an exhibition. Let's actually, we have an exhibition coming up on tapa, which are woven mats and bark cloths from the Pacific Islands, and we have a lot of those in our collection. And many of those are from people who took trips and traveled around and were gifted. So there's a lot of different ways. Some today we typically, I mean, often things are bought. There's so many different ways that objects can end up here. It's really hard to pin it all down, but I'd say that I think one of the things that people maybe don't realize, what a museum like our museum does today, in some ways we don't collect as much as we try to figure out how to take care of things. Like, we have millions of objects, and we really need to make sure that we're taking special care of each one. So I think that we have collections managers who help curators take care of collections, and they spend a lot of time figuring out how to make sure that things are preserved so that 100 years from now people can see the same objects.
Cool. Yeah, it's a big job. 35 million objects and specimens collected over 100 years. So a lot of stuff. So we have questions from, or a question from Mia and Adriana, who are both curious if there's like one thing about your job that is the best about it, or like what your favorite part is.
Oh man, that's really hard. That's hard. That's really hard. I mean, it just depends. Like I said, I love learning, and we're working on an exhibition coming up with some geology, and I've been talking to some geologists, and it's almost like talking to really people who are at the top in their field about things that that are, and they usually are teaching college classes, and but I don't need to go to school. I can just talk with them for an hour or two about what they're doing. But I also I love seeing people in the exhibitions that we've put together too. we redid the, one of my projects was also the insect zoo that we redid recently. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to see that, but it's been really fun to see. Well, it was fun prior to this last year to see kids using the interactives that we made, and hopefully they'll be out on the floor again at some point in the future, and we'll get to see people playing with those. So yeah, that's a really hard question to answer, actually.
So kind of related, Bianca and David are both curious if it sounds like you do like a lot of kind of observing and researching and writing, and that's part of your job that you enjoy as well.
Mhm. Oh yes, that's true. I love writing. I've always written. I have just sort of something that I I started very early, and I actually started editing things for other people very early. And I think that it's interesting because it's a hard thing to make a living at, but that's kind of no matter. I've had many different types of jobs, but I would say that my writing skill has been one of the most important parts of all of them, and has in many ways been the way that I've been able to fund myself, which is not true for everyone. It's hard to make a living as a writer, but I love it. And I'm
Great.
a word nerd, and I like to proofread things. And I know that makes me not like most people, but I do.
Sounds like you found the right place to be then. So kind of along those lines, we also have some students who are curious if there's anything that you dislike about your job, or if there's like a least favorite part maybe.
Yeah, that's yeah, it can be I work on a lot of different projects at once, and so it's sometimes it's hard to feel like I have the time to dedicate to just one thing. Like I'd love to just spend a week talking to the geologists, but I only have an hour or two, you know. Um, and it's also, let me think. I don't know that I dislike this so much, but it's tricky because some of the projects that we work on take a long time to happen. So sometimes if we do one display case, you know, that might be a few months, but a bigger exhibition can take 2 or 3 years or four. And it gets me very confused about time. I don't know another way to say it, but it's just sort of like I feel like I'm kind of constantly thinking that I'm 3 or 4 years ahead. Like in my head, it's 2022 or 2023, but I know it's not. It's really 2021. So I don't know that I dislike that so much, but it is kind of a lot to hold. I don't like sitting so much there. That's the like I writing takes sitting, and you know, so I really like to try to find things to do so that I can get up and move around and do other things. I wish that um, that's my biggest complaint.
I bet a lot of our students can relate to
Yeah.
that feeling of spending a lot of time in front of their computers this year. Okay, so this is a little bit more random, but a lot of students are curious about you and whether you have a pet.
I do. I do. I have two. I have two cats named Max and Herbert. And let's see. I don't know if you guys can you actually see this picture of them if I show it?
Yes.
Yeah, they're my buddies. Yeah, I love animals.
That's awesome. I too have a black and white cat at home. Nathan also has two cats.
Oh, awesome, Nathan.
Awesome. So, you mentioned that you went to school for art, and Ryan and some other students are curious whether you've ever painted or kind of about the art that you make or made.
Oh, yeah. And before I answer that question, I will also say that if any of you guys are interested in art, there are a lot of artists who work at this museum, because when we make things for exhibitions like interactives or like the displays that you see or the videos, we have people that are fabricators or technicians or preparators. Those are the words that we use. And a lot of them often have art school in their background. So it's definitely one of the things that you can do with art education. I started off making prints, if you guys know what that is. I think that you probably do. It sounds like we've got kind of an older group today. So I was a printmaker and a bookmaker, and I did do painting. I also did sculpture. So I did installations where I kind of would turn rooms into other, I would create environments in rooms that you could kind of walk into. So I guess that's a little bit like an exhibit. I did a lot of different things.
Very cool. So art is a super important part of making exhibitions at the museum.
For sure.
Okay, so Samantha is curious. It sounds like you have kind of a big job, and she's curious if you are ever kind of able to ask for help from other folks. She mentioned maybe bringing your kid, but is there is there kind of students that ever help in the process?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I saw that question. I saw the question about the kid float by. I have brought my daughter here just to visit and see what I do. She's pretty little. She's only 6 though, so she doesn't. She thinks that the writing part of what I do is kind of boring, but but we have. So I do a lot of research and thinking about what the story of the exhibition is with the curator, but it's a huge group of us who puts the exhibition together. There are usually 20 or 30, yeah, at least 20 people involved. And then there's people that, all the people that we talk to and interview, that just adds numbers. So I do have a lot of help. I have a project manager who helps with scheduling and budget and meetings. There's another developer who works with me, and we help each other sometimes. And we do have internships. So if, once you're a little older, that would be something that you could look into. We have, and then we have, all of the fabricators and technicians and all of those people that I mentioned. So, there is a lot of help available, definitely.
That's good. So it's a team effort. Cool. Well, we have a couple students. Armani and Steve are both curious if there's something like really cool or like a really amazing discovery that you have made while kind of working on an exhibit. If you can think of like one moment that was really special.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Just one moment.
Or you can share multiple if you're having.
That's really hard. I mean, I think it's cool how much we don't know, if that makes any kind of sense. We have a lot of things in our exhibitions, in our collections, and we know a certain amount about them, but we also don't know things. So like I mentioned, we have this exhibition coming up on tapa and woven mats, and we've been working with people from who are from the Pacific Islands, and we've had them come in and look at our collections and talk to us about some of the items. And sometimes we just find out that we're wrong about where we thought something was from, and I feel like that's kind of amazing, because I think that museums used to be places where people I don't know how to say this, people think that maybe museums and staff at museums know everything, but that's not true. Like, we're all just learning together, and I'm happy to be part of a museum that supports that and like talks to the community and brings the community in and sort of talks to them about the objects and the collections and stuff. So it's probably not quite the answer that that whoever that was looking for. I will say that I remember the first time I went to the tar pits and I got to hold some tiny microfossils, and like I found a little tooth, and I just, like, honestly, it made me cry a little. So, I mean, there's a very specific answer for you.
It is crazy to kind of think about the age behind something like that and the history. I can definitely see being brought to tears in a moment like that. So we have one student, and forgive me, I'm not sure exactly what the name is, but Kay Martinez is curious about the what you have on the wall behind you. Is that a chart of butterflies, or what is that?
Oh, so that is a work of art. That's a piece of that was when we made the bug zoo. That was something that I was gifted. It's a lot of different iridescent beetles, and let's see. I don't know if you can see it a little better. I'm not sure. I can. I have the name of the artist isn't coming to me, unfortunately. I should have looked that up, but I can find out. I'm not sure how to get that name to you, but yeah, it's a bunch of different iridescent beetles.
Cool. Another kind of insect. So we have a question from Strummer, and I'm going to do my best to kind of interpret this. Hopefully I'm getting it right. Strummer's curious if you have any questions about your job. So maybe is there like anything that you've been doing this a while? Is there anything that you're still kind of that's still challenging for you? You're still kind of learning about in your role?
Oh yeah, I mean, always that. Well, there's never, no exhibition is ever the same, so it always goes differently every time. So I think, that's something that I need to be aware of. And yeah, again, this is probably not exactly what Strummer is asking, but I start every exhibition by writing a list of questions. Somebody gave me a tip once. Another exhibition developer said, like, because we're in some ways representing the visitors because we don't have the special knowledge that a curator might have, right? So if we're starting an exhibition on something like um, on bugs or on tapa or whatever, I sometimes I just write down what all my questions are because I don't know anything about them, and sometimes that really helps helps me figure out like what the story is to tell, or how to organize the exhibition. So I have a lot of questions all the time about the things that are in the exhibitions, um, and yeah, I think I also am. We're always just looking for ways to be a little bit more efficient. That's the other honest answer. So some of my other questions are probably more like, how can we do this better, quicker, faster? I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense that you're telling stories about all kinds of different things. So each new exhibition is a new kind of whole set of stuff that you have to learn about.
Mhm.
Super fun. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. This was so awesome getting to learn about your work and all the amazing exhibits at the museum, and hearing more about your story.
Thank you. This was great. And thank you to everybody for your great questions. And I hope you guys keep coming back to these, and I hope that you're all able to make it into the museum soon.
Yes. I'm going to go ahead and close out today's program. Thanks, Danielle. Thank you to Danielle and all of our friends for joining us this morning. We learned so much about the amazing exhibitions in our museum. We can't wait to continue exploring with you in the last 2 sessions of this series. If you want to see more from the Natural History Museum, you can give us a follow on Instagram at NHMLA. We'll also have all the videos from this presentation and others on our YouTube channel for you to watch later. You can catch this recording and others at youtube.com/NHMLA. And if you have another second before you sign off today, we hope you'll answer one more poll question on your way out. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Have a good rest of your day.